You feel it even if you struggle to name it, that quiet exhaustion that settles in your chest after certain conversations. The heaviness that appears not after hard work, not after meaningful effort, but after being around specific people. You tell yourself you are just tired. You blame the day, the stress, the responsibilities. Yet deep down, you know this fatigue is different. It is not physical. It is not earned. It is taken. There are people who do not strike you openly, yet leave you bruised internally. They do not shout, yet they drain. They do not demand explicitly, yet something in you is always giving when you are around them. Your attention, your emotional steadiness, your inner peace. And because this exchange is subtle, because it hides behind politeness, obligation, or familiarity, you tolerate it far longer than you should. The harsh truth the Stoics would place before you is this: not everyone who stands near you is neutral to your soul. Some people are not companions. They are consumers. And if you do not learn to recognize the difference, your calm will slowly be converted into currency for others to spend. You may resist this idea. You may tell yourself it is selfish to think this way, unkind, unphilosophical. But Stoicism was never about being endlessly available. It was about living in accordance with reason. And reason asks a difficult question: why do you keep exposing your inner world to those who consistently leave it weaker? Marcus Aurelius warned himself, do not be dragged by desire or repelled by aversion. Yet how often are you dragged into emotional states you did not choose, simply because you failed to guard your boundaries? How often does your mood shift not because of reality, but because of proximity to someone else's unrest? The discomfort you feel is not accidental. It is a signal. The Stoics believed that the soul reacts before the intellect catches up. Your tension, your irritation, your sudden weariness, these are not flaws, they are messages. And the message is this: something is being taken without your consent. You may have been taught that endurance means tolerating everything. That strength means remaining open no matter the cost. But Seneca dismantles this illusion when he writes, he who associates with others should be either a learner or a teacher. The one is good, the other is bearable. Implicit in this is a warning. Association that neither teaches nor strengthens is not neutral. It erodes. Ask yourself slowly and without judgment, after interacting with this person, do you feel clearer or more confused? Lighter or heavier? More grounded or more agitated? These questions are not cruel, they are honest. And honesty is the first act of self-respect. The modern world encourages constant access, constant availability. It praises openness without discernment. But the Stoics lived differently. They understood that attention is finite, that emotional energy is limited, and that allowing it to be drained recklessly is not virtue, it is negligence. Here is the uncomfortable realization you must face. Some relationships persist not because they are good, but because they are familiar. Some dynamics continue not because they are healthy, but because you have not yet given yourself permission to question them. And questioning them feels dangerous, because it threatens the identity you have built around being agreeable, patient, understanding. But Stoicism does not ask you to be agreeable. It asks you to be aligned with reason. And reason does not demand self-sacrifice to the point of self-erasure. This is where the work begins, not with confrontation, not with blame, but with awareness. Before you can protect yourself, you must first see clearly. You must be willing to admit that not all drains are dramatic and not all threats announce themselves loudly. Some come disguised as routine. Some come wrapped in familiarity. Some come smiling. The Stoics would tell you, what harms you quietly is often the most dangerous because you invite it in daily. Sit with that truth. Let it unsettle you slightly. Discomfort is not your enemy here. It is the opening through which clarity enters. Now that the discomfort has surfaced, your instinct may be to defend, to soften the realization, to tell yourself that you are overthinking, that everyone feels drained sometimes, that this is simply the cost of human connection. And the Stoics would not rush to contradict you. They would simply ask you to look closer, to examine not the event but the pattern, not the isolated moment but the recurring cost. Stoicism does not deny that relationships require effort. It denies that they should require self-abandonment. Here is the reframe that changes everything. Being drained is not the result of caring too much. It is the result of caring without discernment. You are not exhausted because you are weak. You are exhausted because you have been generous in the wrong direction, repeatedly, with questioning whether that generosity was rational. Epictetus was relentless on this point. He reminded his students, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. What he meant was not that wisdom looks foolish, but that protecting your inner world often requires going against social expectation. It may look cold to pause before engaging. It may look distant to step back. It may look selfish to say no. But Stoicism is not interested in appearances. It is interested in internal order. The pain point you experience is subtle but corrosive. It shows up as resentment you do not want to admit, as irritation that surprises you, as a sense of being unseen, unheard, or used, even when no one has explicitly wronged you. And because this pain is quiet, because it accumulates slowly, you normalize it. You carry it as background noise, but background noise still drains energy. Ask yourself, why do you feel relief when certain people are not around? Why does your body relax when certain conversations end? Why do you feel the need to recover after interactions that were supposedly ordinary? These are not random reactions. They are feedback. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, but the soul is also colored by its company." The Stoics understood that environment is not only physical, it is psychological, emotional, relational. And if you repeatedly expose yourself to environments that are chaotic, needy, manipulative, or draining, your inner equilibrium cannot remain untouched. The reframe is this: you are not obligated to absorb what others refuse to process themselves. When someone constantly complains without reflection, they are outsourcing their inner disorder. When someone demands reassurance without self-examination, they are transferring anxiety. When someone thrives on drama, they feed on reaction. And if you are always present, always responsive, always available, you become part of the mechanism that sustains their imbalance. This is where guilt often arises. You may think, but they need me. The Stoics would respond calmly, need is not a moral claim. Seneca cautioned, associate with people who are likely to improve you, not because he despised others, but because he respected the limits of the mind. You cannot elevate yourself while constantly being pulled downward, and you cannot save someone by drowning alongside them. The pain deepens when you realize how long this pattern has existed, how many times you have ignored your own signals, how often you have explained away discomfort instead of investigating it. But Stoicism does not linger in regret. It uses regret as fuel for clarity. The Stoic reframe removes moral drama from the situation. This is not about labeling others as villains. It is about recognizing incompatible dynamics. Fire is not evil. Water is not wrong. But if you pour water on fire repeatedly, something must give. Either the fire weakens or it learns to retreat. You are not meant to be endlessly porous. The Stoics spoke of the inner citadel, a mental fortress where your reason remains intact regardless of external influence. That citadel does not build itself. It requires boundaries, and boundaries are not walls of hostility. They are lines of responsibility. The pain you feel is the cost of having no such lines, of letting access replace intention, of confusing kindness with availability. Stoicism corrects this by reminding you that your primary duty is not to preserve every connection, but to preserve your capacity to live well. Once you see this, something shifts. You stop asking, "Why am I so tired?" and begin asking, "What am I allowing?" That question is uncomfortable because it returns agency to you. But agency is the beginning of protection. This reframe does not harden you. It steadies you. It allows you to care without being consumed, to listen without absorbing, to help without hemorrhaging yourself. It restores proportion. And once proportion returns, the signs become easier to see. The first principle the Stoics would insist you understand is not about other people at all. It is about you, about where your power begins and where it ends. Because until this boundary is clear, every interaction becomes a potential drain, not due to malice, but due to confusion. The principle is this: your energy is spent through judgment, not through contact. This is where many misunderstand the source of their exhaustion. You are not drained simply because you interact with someone. You are drained because of what you decide those interactions mean. Because of the internal dialogue you allow to run unchecked. because of the responsibility you silently assume without questioning whether it belongs to you. Epictetus stated it plainly, men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of them. Applied here, this means that no one can drain you unless your judgments make room for it. This is not an accusation. It is a liberation. If the drain is mediated by judgment, then judgment is where protection begins. Notice how the drain actually occurs. You listen and then you interpret. You interpret someone's frustration as your obligation to fix it. You interpret their disappointment as your failure. You interpret their mood as something you must manage. None of this is automatic. It is learned. And because it is learned, it can be unlearned. The Stoics were relentless about this distinction. They taught that your thoughts, your choices, your values are within your control. Other people's emotions are not. Yet how often do you wake already preparing to manage someone else's state of mind? How often do you leave an interaction replaying it internally, editing yourself, wondering what you could have done differently to preserve harmony? This is where energy leaks, not in the moment but in the aftermath, in the rumination, in the self-questioning, in the silent responsibility you never agreed to but consistently accept. The first principle trains you to interrupt this pattern, to say calmly and without defensiveness, this feeling is theirs, this reaction is theirs. My responsibility ends with my conduct, not their satisfaction. This is not emotional withdrawal, it is ethical clarity. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He reminded himself, I can choose not to be harmed, and I won't feel harmed. This does not mean he denied pain. It means he refused to let another person's inner disorder dictate his own. He understood that without this discipline, even well-intentioned people become emotionally overextended. The sign someone is draining you often appears as a compulsion to explain yourself, to justify your boundaries, to prove your goodwill. When you feel this urge repeatedly, it is not because you are unclear. It is because your judgments are still negotiating with expectations that are not yours to fulfill. This principle requires you to become precise. To ask in the moment, what exactly am I responsible for here, not what feels expected, not what avoids discomfort, but what reason supports. The answer is usually smaller than you think. You are responsible for honesty, not harmony at any cost, for respect, not rescue, for listening, not absorbing. There is discomfort in this clarity because it exposes how often you have been living beyond your jurisdiction. But the Stoics would tell you that peace begins when you return to your proper role. You are not a regulator of other people's emotions. You are a guardian of your own reason. When you apply this principle, something shifts immediately. Interactions become lighter. You listen without tightening. You respond without overextending. You disengage without guilt, not because you care less, but because you care more accurately. This is the first line of protection, not avoidance, not coldness, but correct judgment. Once you have reclaimed responsibility for your judgments, a deeper pattern becomes visible, one that is far more uncomfortable to confront, because it reveals not just how others affect you, but why certain people have access to you in the first place. The Stoics understood this well. They knew that persistent emotional drain is rarely accidental. It follows attraction, and attraction follows unexamined habits of the self. The second principle is this: what drains you repeatedly is often what you have been trained to tolerate. This is not about blame. It is about conditioning. Over time, you have learned which behaviors you excuse, which dynamics you endure, which emotional weights you silently carry. And once a pattern is established, others do not need to push against your boundaries. You remove them yourself. Seneca warned, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But there is another layer here. We also suffer more from repetition than from intensity. A single difficult interaction may sting. A constant low-grade drain reshapes you. It teaches your nervous system to live in a state of quiet vigilance, to anticipate disruption, to remain emotionally braced even in calm moments. This is where the second principle demands brutal honesty. Ask yourself, why does this person feel entitled to my time, my attention, my emotional labor? Not why they take, but why you allow, not as self-criticism, but as investigation. Often the answer is fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being seen as cold or selfish. And so you tolerate small intrusions that slowly become expectations. You respond immediately, you over-explain, you adjust yourself preemptively, and each time you do, you reinforce the pattern. The Stoics would call this a failure of proherses, the faculty of choice. Not because you choose wrongly once, but because you stop choosing altogether. You default. You comply automatically. You act from habit rather than reason. Marcus Aurelius cautioned himself, if someone does wrong, the harm is to himself. If he does wrong to you, the harm is to you only if you allow it. This is not moralizing. It is diagnostic. It points to the mechanism of drain, unchallenged access combined with unexamined tolerance. There is a particular pain in realizing that some of your exhaustion comes not from being needed, but from being predictable. Predictable in your availability, predictable in your patience, predictable in your silence. When people know you will absorb, they hand you more to carry. This principle teaches you to disrupt predictability, not through confrontation, but through consistency with reason. To pause where you once rushed, to respond where you once absorbed, to disengage where you once explained. These shifts feel uncomfortable at first because they break expectation, but expectation was the trap. Stoicism does not ask you to harden yourself against others. It asks you to stop training others to misuse you. There is a difference. One creates isolation, the other creates equilibrium. Notice how draining individuals often react when access is reduced. Confusion, irritation, subtle guilt-inducing comments. This reaction is information. It reveals that the relationship was not built on mutual respect, but on unbalanced exchange. And imbalance, left uncorrected, always extracts a cost. The second principle restores balance by reminding you that tolerance is not virtue when it violates reason. Patience is not wisdom when it enables harm, and silence is not peace when it is purchased with self-erasure. As you apply this principle, you may feel internal resistance, a pull back toward old roles, old identities, the one who is always understanding, always available, always strong. But Stoicism asks a sharper question, strong for what? Strength that serves no rational end is just endurance without direction. This principle does not make you less compassionate. It makes your compassion sustainable. It ensures that when you give, it is chosen, not extracted. And when you remain, it is because the exchange strengthens rather than diminishes you. This is the second line of protection: awareness of tolerance, disruption of unconscious patterns, restoration of balance. When you have corrected your judgments and interrupted the patterns you were trained to tolerate, you arrive at a more demanding threshold, one that most people never cross, not because it is complex, but because it requires a different relationship with discomfort. The Stoics knew this principle would be resisted more than any other because it threatens a familiar illusion, the belief that peace comes from being liked. The third principle is this: you must choose inner order over social approval every time. This is where many people remain trapped, not by others, but by the need to be seen as good, kind, reasonable, patient. You may tell yourself these are virtues, and they can be, but when they are practiced without wisdom, they become vulnerabilities. When they are driven by fear rather than reason, they invite exploitation. Epictetus warned sharply, if you want to be invincible, make no treaty with things that are not in your control. Approval is one of those things. Reputation is another. The emotional comfort of others is yet another. The moment your peace depends on how you are perceived, your inner citadel is breached. Notice how draining relationships often rely on this exact weakness: the subtle threat of disappointment, the unspoken implication that withdrawing, refusing, or stepping back would make you cold, selfish, or disloyal. And because you fear that identity, you comply, you endure, you absorb, not because it is right, but because it preserves an image. The Stoics dismantled this illusion mercilessly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, I do my duty, other things trouble me not. Duty, for the Stoic, was not social obligation. It was alignment with reason and virtue. And virtue does not require you to sacrifice your inner order to maintain external harmony. Here is the painful clarity this principle brings. If someone's stability depends on your self-abandonment, the relationship is already disordered. You are not being supportive. You are being consumed. And the longer you participate, the more normal the imbalance feels. This principle forces you to confront a difficult truth about identity. Part of you may be attached to being the one who is always there, the one who listens, the one who understands, the one who carries others when they refuse to carry themselves. Letting go of that role can feel like a loss, it can feel like betrayal, but it is neither. It is correction. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is neither raised up by prosperity nor cast down by adversity." Extend this inward. The wise person is not raised by praise nor cast down by disapproval. Approval becomes information, not currency. Disapproval becomes noise, not threat. The moment you internalize this, draining dynamics lose their leverage. Guilt loses its G. Emotional manipulation loses its force. You begin to act from a quieter, firmer place, not reactive, not defensive, simply grounded. This does not mean you become indifferent. It means you become selective. You choose when to engage. You choose when to withdraw. And crucially, you choose without needing to justify your choice to those who benefit from your exhaustion. There is a particular strength in being misunderstood and remaining steady. The Stoics saw this as a test of progress. Can you do what is right without applause? Can you step back without explanation? Can you endure the discomfort of being seen inaccurately without rushing to correct it? Most draining situations persist because someone refuses to tolerate this discomfort. They rush back in to restore the image, to smooth the tension, to reassure, and in doing so, they re-enter the cycle. The third principle breaks the cycle decisively. It replaces approval-seeking with self-respect. And self-respect, once established, is deeply protective. People sense it, they adjust, or they leave. Either outcome restores your energy. This is not ruthlessness toward others. It is discipline toward yourself. The discipline to remain aligned even when it costs you ease, even when it costs you familiarity, even when it costs you approval. And this discipline does not make you smaller, it makes you solid. This is the third line of protection. The willingness to stand alone internally so you no longer feel crowded externally. At this point, the struggle changes shape. It is no longer about identifying draining people or correcting external patterns alone. It becomes quieter, more internal, and more demanding. Because now you are faced not with others' behavior, but with your own relationship to strength. The Stoics understood that true protection does not come from avoidance, confrontation, or control of others. It comes from inner solidity, from becoming someone who cannot be easily depleted. This is where reflection deepens into power. Most people think power is the ability to influence others, to persuade, to manage, to maintain harmony at all costs. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Power is the ability to remain internally ordered regardless of who stands before you. Seneca wrote, "The greatest power is to have oneself in one's own power." And this is not a metaphor. It is a daily discipline. Reflect carefully on this. When someone drains you, what they are truly accessing is not your time, not your attention, but your emotional reactivity. They provoke explanation. They provoke guilt. They provoke engagement beyond reason. And the moment you stop reacting internally, their influence collapses. This is not suppression, it is sovereignty. The Stoics trained themselves to observe emotional responses as events, not commands. When irritation arises, they do not immediately act. When guilt appears, they do not immediately obey. They pause, they interrogate. Is this impression accurate? Is this response necessary? Is this aligned with reason? And in that pause, power accumulates. Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentlessly. He reminded himself, "You are under no obligation to form opinions about this matter." This sentence alone can dismantle an entire draining dynamic. You are not required to judge, fix, soothe, or rescue every disturbance placed before you. Many things lose their weight the moment you refuse to internalize them. Here is the deep reflection you must face. Your exhaustion has been teaching you where you lack internal boundaries. Not external ones, internal ones, places where you automatically engage, explain, absorb, or defend without conscious choice. These reflexes feel like kindness, but they are actually habits. And habits, once exposed, can be retrained. This is where personal power is built, not by becoming harder but by becoming slower. Slower to react, slower to assume responsibility, slower to emotionally enter spaces that are not yours to govern. You may notice fear arise here, a fear that if you stop absorbing, you will lose connection, that if you stop rescuing, you will be abandoned, that if you stop being endlessly accommodating, you will be alone. The Stoics would meet this fear calmly and ask, is connection that requires self-betrayal worth preserving? True connection does not require depletion. It requires presence. And presence is impossible when you are internally scattered, resentful, or fatigued. As you practice this inner restraint, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel stronger without being louder, calmer without being distant, more selective without being cruel. This is Stoic power, quiet, unprovable, unimpressed. Epictetus described this state when he said, "Seek not that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." Applied here, it means you no longer require others to be different in order for you to be at peace. You allow them to be exactly as they are, while you remain exactly as you have chosen to be. This removes the final lever of drain, because draining people rely on your resistance, your frustration, your emotional investment. When those disappear, the dynamic collapses, not through force, but through irrelevance. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement on your terms. It is the reclaiming of emotional energy once wasted on correction, justification, and silent endurance. That energy returns to you, and when it does, you feel something you may not have felt in a long time: steadiness. Steadiness is the mark of personal power in Stoicism, not excitement, not dominance, but the ability to remain unchanged by chaos, the ability to stand in your own center while others orbit unpredictably. This is the deep work, and it is invisible. No one applauds it. No one rewards it immediately. But over time, it transforms how people relate to you. Those who fed on reaction fade away. Those capable of mutual respect remain, and even in solitude, you are not diminished. You are intact. Now the final shift occurs, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The Stoics would say this is the moment when philosophy stops being something you use and becomes something you are. Because at this point, you are no longer merely protecting yourself from being drained. You are redefining who has access to you at the level of identity. This is where the work completes its circle. You began with discomfort, that quiet, unnamed exhaustion. You moved through awareness, reframing, discipline, and restraint. And now you arrive at the Stoic conclusion: your peace is not something to be negotiated. It is something to be embodied. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like that." This was not directed only at cruelty or injustice. It was directed at disorder, at chaos, at emotional excess, at dependence. To not be like that means you no longer organize your inner life around reaction. You no longer define yourself by what others pull out of you. You define yourself by what you refuse to surrender. This is the identity shift. You are no longer the one who absorbs, no longer the one who explains endlessly, no longer the one who carries what is not yours. You are the one who remains composed, who chooses engagement deliberately, who understands that access to your attention, your emotional energy, your presence, is not a default setting. It is a privilege granted by reason. The Stoics believed identity was forged through repeated inner decisions, not through labels, not through declarations, but through daily alignment. Each time you pause instead of react, you reinforce this identity. Each time you withdraw without resentment, you strengthen it. Each time you choose inner order over external harmony, it solidifies. Seneca captured this when he wrote, "He is powerful who has power over himself." Notice the simplicity. Not admired, not needed, not praised, powerful, because power in Stoicism is the ability to remain whole in a world that constantly invites fragmentation. You may notice something surprising now. As you stop being drained, you also stop being magnetized to draining dynamics. You are no longer pulled toward chaos. You no longer feel responsible for fixing what you did not break. There is a quiet confidence in knowing where you end and others begin, and that confidence reshapes your presence. People feel it, they may not articulate it, but they sense it. Some will respect it, some will retreat from it. Both outcomes are confirmations, not losses, because what leaves when boundaries appear was never sustained by mutual strength. This is not isolation, it is discernment. You still care, but you care without entanglement. You still listen, but you listen without surrender. You still give, but you give without depletion. This is the Stoic ideal, engagement without erosion. Epictetus advised, keep before your eyes night and day those things which appear to you to be the highest and the most important. What is highest here is not harmony at any cost. It is integrity of the self, the preservation of your rational faculty, the protection of your inner citadel. And now that citadel is no longer theoretical, it is lived. You do not need to announce this change, you do not need to explain it. Identity shifts do not require witnesses. They require consistency, and consistency practiced quietly reshapes everything. So when you encounter draining energy now, you recognize it early. Not with anger, not with fear, with clarity, and clarity allows choice. You engage if it aligns, you disengage if it does not. Either way, you remain intact.